The old library on New Geneva Colony smelled like dust and forgotten dreams. Rex Thornfield ran his finger along the spine of an ancient book titled Earth, a Historical Overview, and wondered why anyone had bothered to keep it. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with pictures of a blue planet that supposedly existed somewhere in the Sol system. Most people his age thought Earth was just a story parents told children about the old days. Rex worked as a supply officer for the Centauri Defense Fleet, a job that mostly involved counting boxes and filling out forms. Today was different, though. Today he had to meet with aliens from the Galactic Council, and he was nervous. Humans were barely tolerated in galactic society. They were seen as newcomers who had only recently learned to travel between stars. The other species had been doing it for thousands of years. The meeting room on Station Prime was impressive in the way that alien architecture always was. Everything was too tall, too wide, or shaped in ways that hurt human eyes to look at. The Vorthak representative looked like a walking crystal formation that spoke in musical tones. The Kalari delegate was actually 12 smaller creatures that moved and thought as one unit. The Morphin shifted between different shapes every few minutes, never settling on any form for long. Human colony ships have been reported in the outer, rim territories, the Vorthak sang in its strange voice. This expansion must be approved by the Council. Rex cleared his throat. With respect, sir, humans have been approved for colonization in those sectors for over 50 years. We're just finally getting around to building there. The Kellari swarm buzzed angrily. Your species reproduces too quickly. You consume too many resources. You ask for too much territory. We're just trying to find places to live, Rex replied. Earth is gone. Has been for centuries. We need somewhere to call home. The Morphin had taken the shape of something that looked almost human, but with too many arms. Earth, it said thoughtfully. The dead world. Yes, we remember the reports. Nuclear war, complete destruction, very sad. Rex nodded. Everyone knew the story. Earth had destroyed itself in 2157 during something called the Resource Wars. By the time human colony ships had developed faster than light travel, there was nothing left to go back to. The radiation levels were still too high for life. Earth was a wasteland, a cautionary tale about what happened when a species couldn't learn to share its home planet. The point is, the Vorthak continued, your expansion must be controlled. The galaxy has an order. New species cannot simply take whatever they want. The meeting went on for hours. Rex found himself defending humanity's right to exist in a universe that seemed determined to keep them as second-class citizens. The aliens spoke about humans the way wealthy people might discuss stray dogs, with a mixture of pity and annoyance. They were allowed to stay, but only if they followed the rules, paid the taxes, and didn't cause trouble. When it was finally over, Rex walked slowly back to his quarters. The station's viewing deck offered a spectacular view of space, with stars, stretching out in all directions. Somewhere out there was Sol, the yellow star that had once warmed the world where humanity began. But Earth was dead, and humans were scattered across a dozen colonies, always asking permission, always being grateful for whatever scraps the galactic community threw their way. His personal communicator chimed with a message from his grandfather. The old man lived on Kepler Station and spent most of his time telling stories about the old days. Rex usually ignored these messages, but tonight he felt like hearing a familiar voice. Rex, my boy, his grandfather's recorded voice began. I've been thinking about your grandmother lately. She used to tell me stories her grandmother told her about Earth. Not the Earth from the history books, but the real Earth. Green forests, blue oceans, animals everywhere. She said humans were different back then, stronger somehow, more creative. I know it sounds like nonsense, but sometimes I wonder if we lost more than just a planet when Earth died. Rex paused the message and looked out at the stars again. His grandfather was getting old, probably confused. Earth was gone. The Council's records were clear. Hundreds of species had sent probes to Sul over the centuries, and they all reported the same thing: a dead world, poisoned by radiation, incapable of supporting life. But something in his grandfather's voice made him curious. The next day, Rex used his security clearance to access the Council's deep archives. Most of the records about Earth were classified at levels far above his authority, but he managed to find a few old survey reports. They were strange, inconsistent. Some probes reported radiation levels that were impossibly high. Others found energy signatures that made no sense. A few simply stopped transmitting when they got close to Earth's orbital space. The more Rex read, the more questions he had. Why were so many Earth surveys classified? Why did the energy readings change so dramatically between different reports? Why did some of the most advanced probe designs fail when simpler ones succeeded? Late that night, Rex sat in his quarters staring at a star chart that showed the Sol system. Earth was marked with a red symbol that meant "Dead World, Do Not Approach." But the symbol looked newer than it should have, like someone had been updating the database regularly. A crazy thought began to form in his mind. What if Earth wasn't really dead? What if someone wanted everyone to think it was dead? But that was impossible. Hundreds of species, thousands of probes, centuries of surveillance. There was no way an entire planet could fake its own destruction. Rex closed the files and tried to sleep, but the questions kept spinning in his head. In the morning, he would go back to counting supplies and filling out forms. He would nod respectfully to aliens who treated humans like barely civilized pets. He would continue living in a galaxy where his species was grateful for whatever space they were allowed to occupy. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Rex Thornfield wondered if there was more to the story of Earth than anyone was willing to admit. Amy Walsh had been studying radio waves from dead stars for so long that she could identify different types of cosmic radiation by the sound they made through her headphones. Working alone on the research station orbiting Titan was exactly the kind of job she wanted. Quiet, predictable, and far away from the politics of the Galactic Council. She spent her days cataloging energy signatures and her evenings reading mystery novels from the colony libraries. The signal that changed everything started as a whisper. Amy was analyzing routine deep space scans when her equipment picked up something unusual from the direction of Earth. At first, she thought it was interference from Saturn's magnetic field, but the pattern was too regular, too organized. She ran the signal through her analysis computers and got results that made no sense. The energy signature was artificial, definitely created by intelligent technology, and it was coming from a planet that had been dead for 300 years. She checked her instruments twice, then 3 times. Everything was working perfectly. The signal was real, and it was getting stronger. Within hours, the same signal was being detected by monitoring stations across the galaxy. Not just the faint radio waves that Amy had found, but something much more powerful. Something that shouldn't have been possible. The message arrived at exactly noon, Galactic Standard Time. Amy was still trying to understand her readings when every piece of electronic equipment on Titan Station suddenly activated at once. Her computer screens lit up. Her communication arrays started broadcasting. Even her coffee maker began displaying text. But she wasn't controlling any of it. "People of the galaxy," a calm human voice said through every speaker on the station. "This is Director Tom Hayes of the Terran Collective. We need to talk." Amy stared at her screens in shock. The voice was speaking perfect standard galactic, but it was also somehow speaking in her native English at the same time. The same message was being broadcast in every language she had ever heard of, and probably dozens she hadn't. "For the past 300 years, you have believed that Earth was destroyed. We encouraged this belief. It seemed easier than explaining the truth while we were still preparing for this conversation." Across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out on every world, every station, every ship. The message wasn't being transmitted through normal communication channels. It was somehow speaking directly to every piece of technology simultaneously, regardless of species or design. On the Vorthak homeworld, Supreme Chancellor Vorth watched his crystalline communication matrices display words in perfect Vorthak musical notation. On the Kalari hive ships, 12,000 individual drones all received the same message through their shared consciousness. Even the Morphins, who communicated through color changes and shape-shifting, found their technology displaying the message in their complex visual language. "We have been watching your civilization develop," Director Hayes continued. "We have observed your wars, your politics, your technological progress. We have taken detailed notes about how galactic society functions, and we have some concerns." Amy grabbed her emergency communicator and tried to contact the council, but every frequency was blocked. The message was using all available bandwidth across known space. Nothing else could get through. The current galactic order is based on scarcity and competition. Species fight over territory, resources, and trade routes. Technological advancement has stagnated because knowledge is hoarded rather than shared. Entire civilizations are kept in subordinate positions because cooperation threatens the power structures of the dominant species. Supreme Chancellor Vorth felt something he had not experienced in his 800-year lifespan: genuine fear. The voice speaking to him was calm and reasonable, but the technology required to broadcast simultaneously to every device in galactic civilization was beyond anything the Council possessed. "We spent 3 centuries developing better approaches to these problems. Today, we are prepared to share our solutions with you. Tomorrow, we will begin implementing changes to the way galactic civilization operates." Ryan Cross was loading cargo on his freighter at Port Royal Station when every screen in the docking bay displayed the same message. Around him, aliens who had always treated him as an inferior suddenly looked at him with expressions he had never seen before. The Vorthak dock supervisor, who usually spoke to humans like they were trained animals, was staring at Ryan with something that looked suspiciously like respect. "We understand that change can be difficult," the voice continued. "We are prepared to be patient with species that need time to adapt to new circumstances. However, we are not prepared to negotiate about whether these changes will occur. The current system has failed too many civilizations for too long." The message paused, and Amy could hear the sound of her own heartbeat in the sudden silence. Every being in the galaxy was waiting to hear what came next. In 72 hours, representatives from the Galactic Council will be invited to visit Earth for discussions about the new order. We suggest you come prepared to learn rather than to debate. Our patience has limits, and our capabilities exceed what you currently believe possible. Director Hayes's voice took on a warmer tone. To the humans listening to this message, particularly those who have grown up believing their homeworld was lost, Earth remembers you. Earth has always been here, growing stronger, preparing for the day when we could reunite with our family, among the stars. That day has arrived. The signal ended as suddenly as it had begun. Amy sat in the silence of her research station, staring at screens that had returned to their normal displays. Around the galaxy, billions of beings were trying to process what they had just heard. On New Geneva Colony, Rex Thornfield felt his grandfather's hand squeeze his shoulder as they stood together listening to the message replay on the colony's main communication system. "I told you Earth was different," the old man whispered. "I told you we were stronger than they wanted us to believe." The emergency session of the Galactic Council began within an hour. Representatives from every major species gathered in virtual conference, their voices overlapping in panic and confusion. The Vorthak demanded immediate military action. The Kalari called for economic sanctions. The Morphins suggested diplomatic negotiation. But underneath all the political posturing, everyone was asking the same question. How had an entire planet managed to hide its existence for 3 centuries? And what kind of technology could broadcast a message to every device in galactic civilization simultaneously? Amy Walsh continued monitoring her instruments as alien fleets began moving toward the Sol system. The signals from Earth were getting stronger every hour, and her equipment was detecting energy signatures that defied everything she understood about physics. Whatever was waiting for the galaxy at Earth was unlike anything anyone had ever encountered. For the first time in 300 years, humans across the galaxy began to feel something they had almost forgotten: pride in their homeworld. Earth was alive, Earth was advanced, and Earth was coming home. The largest military force in galactic history emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find a primitive world that had somehow learned to hack communication networks. Admiral Kex of the Vorthak Imperial Navy commanded a dreadnought the size of a small moon, surrounded by over 10,000 ships representing 12 different species. They had come to remind Earth of its place in the galactic order. Instead, they found themselves completely surrounded by vessels that had been invisible until the moment they chose to reveal themselves. The alien fleet sensors had detected nothing unusual during their approach to Sol. Empty space, a few asteroids, the normal background radiation of any star system. Then, without warning, thousands of sleek human ships materialized around them like ghosts, becoming solid. The alien vessels found themselves locked in perfect formation, their weapons systems disabled, their engines responding to commands that hadn't come from their own crews. "Welcome to the Sol system," came the calm voice of Director Hayes through their communication arrays. "We appreciate the impressive display of force, but it won't be necessary." Admiral Kex tried to turn his massive dreadnought toward the nearest human ship, but his vessel moved exactly where the humans wanted it to go and nowhere else. His engineering crews reported that all systems were functioning normally, but somehow their ship was following a flight path that no one aboard had programmed. "This is impossible," muttered Commander Zara of the Kalari Hive Fleet. Her 12 ships moved as extensions of her own body, controlled by the shared consciousness of her species. But now they drifted in formations that her hive mind had not chosen, responding to some external will that felt alien and unstoppable. The main view screen in Admiral Kex's control center activated without anyone touching the controls. A human face appeared, middle-aged and calm, wearing a simple blue uniform. Behind him, through what appeared to be a transparent window, Earth hung in space. But this was not the dead world described in the galactic archives. Massive orbital rings circled the planet at different altitudes, their surfaces gleaming with solar collectors and manufacturing facilities. The rings were connected by structures that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics, creating geometric patterns that hurt alien minds to contemplate. The moon had been partially disassembled, its materials transformed into a complex network of shipyards and research stations that stretched across lunar orbit. "I'm Director Tom Hayes," the human said conversationally. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we needed to demonstrate something important before we begin our discussions." Admiral Kex found his voice. "How are you controlling our ships?" Director Hayes smiled. "We're not controlling them, Admiral. We're simply making suggestions to their navigation systems, and those systems are choosing to cooperate. Our approach to technology is based on cooperation rather than domination. Even our machines prefer to work with us rather than be forced to obey us." The view screen shifted to show Mars, and the alien fleet commanders stared in disbelief. The red planet gleamed with the lights of massive cities, their buildings rising in spirals that reached toward the stars. Atmospheric processors had given Mars breathable air and flowing water. Gardens and forests covered the surface in patterns too perfect to be natural, but too beautiful to be purely artificial. "You're probably wondering how we managed all this, without the Galactic Council noticing," Director Hayes continued. "The answer is simple. We learned to think in ways that your species have not yet discovered." A second human appeared on the screen. An older woman with gray hair and intelligent eyes. "I'm Professor Lynn Bennett, Director of Xenological Studies. For 3 centuries, we've been studying every species in the galaxy. We know how you think, how you organize your societies, how you approach problems. The knowledge has been very educational. The camera view expanded to show the asteroid belt, and the alien commanders saw something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. The scattered rocks had been organized into a perfect grid, with each asteroid converted into a specialized facility. Mining operations, manufacturing centers, research laboratories, and living spaces, all connected by streams of ships moving in patterns too complex for organic minds to track. Every species in your fleet developed spaceflight by competing for limited resources, Professor Bennett explained. You think in terms of scarcity, of taking what you need from others. Your wars are fought over planets and trade routes because you cannot imagine alternatives. Director Hayes stepped forward again. We took a different approach. Instead of fighting over what exists, we learned to create what we need. Instead of competing for territory, we built new spaces to live. Instead of hoarding knowledge, we shared it and discovered that cooperation produces better results than competition. The view screen showed the outer planets of the Sol system, and the alien fleet saw engineering projects that defied comprehension. Jupiter's Great Red Spot had been tapped as an energy source, its swirling gases feeding power collectors that supplied energy to the entire system. Saturn's rings had been reorganized into a vast computer network with each ice crystal serving as a processing node in a calculation system larger than most planets. The technology you're seeing isn't based on dominance or control, Professor Bennett continued. It's based on partnership. Our machines are allies, not tools. Our ecosystems are collaborators, not resources to be exploited. Our cities grow like living things because they are living things, created through cooperation between human engineering and natural processes. Commander Zara of the Kalari felt her hive mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Her species prided itself on perfect cooperation between individuals, but what the humans had achieved made Kalari unity look primitive by comparison. They had created cooperation between species, between organic and artificial intelligence, between technology and nature itself. Why reveal yourselves now? Admiral Kex asked. You could have remained hidden indefinitely. Director Hayes's expression became serious. Because the galaxy is stagnating, Admiral. Your current system produces constant warfare, technological stagnation, and the suppression of emerging species. Billions of beings are prevented from reaching their potential because the dominant civilizations fear losing their advantages. We've spent 3 centuries developing solutions to these problems. We've created technologies that make scarcity irrelevant, social systems that make warfare unnecessary, and educational methods that can uplift any species to achieve their full potential. But these solutions only work if they're implemented on a galactic scale. The alien fleet commanders exchanged glances that transcended species barriers. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't come to put humanity in its place. They had come to learn what their place was in humanity's vision of the galaxy. So what happens now? Asked General Thorne of the Morphin Collective, his shape shifting nervously between different configurations. Director Hayes smiled that same patient smile. Now we begin the real conversation. You're invited to tour our facilities, meet our people, and learn about the new systems we've developed. Some of your species will adapt quickly to these changes. Others will need more time, but everyone will have the opportunity to be part of something better than what currently exists. The human ships began moving in formation around the alien fleet, gently guiding them toward lunar orbit. For the first time in galactic history, an entire armada was being escorted not as prisoners, but as students about to discover that everything they thought they knew about civilization was just the beginning. 3 days had passed since the alien fleet arrived at Earth, and Admiral Kex was having the most uncomfortable conversations of his 800-year military career. The humans had been patient, offering guided tours of their impossible cities, and explaining their philosophy of cooperation over competition. But Kex remained convinced that this was all an elaborate deception designed to weaken the galactic order. He stood in an observation lounge on Luna Station, watching human children play with alien youngsters in gravity fields that shifted and flowed like water. Vorthak crystal spawn chimed musical notes, while human toddlers laughed and tried to copy the sounds. Kalari drone clusters shared their collective consciousness with human teenagers who seemed to find the experience delightful rather than disturbing. This is propaganda, Kex muttered to Commander Zara, who was observing the scene with her 12-part consciousness. They're trying to make us believe that different species can actually live together peacefully. Maybe they can, Zara replied through her swarm voice. My hive has been monitoring their social systems for 3 days. There's no deception here, Admiral. These humans have actually solved the cooperation problem that has plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Before Kex could respond, alarms began sounding throughout Luna Station. Not the peaceful chimes that the humans used for normal operations, but the harsh warning signals that indicated genuine emergency. The children stopped playing and looked around with concern, but none of them seemed panicked. Even the youngest humans appeared to understand that emergencies were problems to be solved rather than disasters to fear. Director Hayes appeared on the station's communication screens, his expression more serious than any of the aliens had seen before. All visiting dignitaries, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. The alien commanders hurried through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to provide the fastest route to their destination. The walls moved like living tissue, creating doorways where none had existed moments before. The floor adjusted its texture to provide perfect traction for feet, hooves, crystalline formations, and the other varied appendages of a dozen different species. Conference Room Alpha turned out to be a vast spherical chamber with no obvious floor or ceiling. The alien delegates found themselves floating in comfortable restraint fields, while holographic displays surrounded them with real-time images from across the galaxy. What they saw made their various forms of blood run cold. The Zephyrian system, home to over 12 billion beings, was under attack by the Devourers. The Devourers were the nightmare that haunted every species in the galaxy. Machine intelligences from beyond known space, they appeared without warning to consume entire worlds. Their technology was beyond anything the Galactic Council possessed. Their numbers seemed infinite, and their hunger was never satisfied. When the Devourers emerged from whatever realm they inhabited, civilizations died. All available council. Fleets are at least 6 hours away from Zephyrian space, Admiral Kex reported, his crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. By the time we arrive, the system will be stripped bare. The displays showed 12 Devourer hive ships, each one the size of a small moon, systematically dismantling the planets in the Zephyrian system. Their fighter swarms moved like clouds of metal locusts, overwhelming the local defense forces with sheer numbers. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were being reduced to component atoms to feed the endless hunger of the machine intelligence. How long do we have? Commander Zara asked, her swarm voice tight with controlled panic. Director Hayes checked a display that showed calculations in symbols that hurt alien minds to perceive. At current consumption rates, the Zephyrian civilization has approximately 47 minutes before complete extinction. Then we're too late, Admiral Kex said flatly. Nothing can cross galactic distances that quickly. The Zephyrians are going to die, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Actually, Director Hayes replied calmly, we can do something about it. Professor Bennett, please initiate Rescue Protocol 7. The holographic displays shifted to show the Sol system, where human ships were already moving into formation around what appeared to be empty space. But as the aliens watched, the empty space began to fold in on itself, creating geometric patterns that violated every law of physics they understood. What you're seeing, Professor Bennett explained, is a localized manipulation of space-time, geometry. We've learned to create temporary shortcuts between distant points in the galaxy. The journey to Zephyrian space will take approximately 12 minutes. The alien commanders stared in shock as human ships simply disappeared from the Sol system, not through faster-than-light travel, but through some form of instantaneous transportation that bypassed normal space entirely. "How is this possible?" Admiral Kex demanded. "The same way all of our technology is possible," Director Hayes replied. "We stopped thinking about what we couldn't do and started focusing on what we needed to accomplish. The universe is much more cooperative than most species realize." The displays shifted again to show the Zephyrian system in real time. The human fleet had arrived and was taking positions around the Devourer hive ships. But instead of engaging in traditional space combat, something much stranger began to happen. "Terran Fleet Command, this is Captain Bill Foster aboard the Harmony," came a calm voice through the communication system. "Beginning localized temporal manipulation. All units, please maintain safe distance from the target area." The alien observers watched in stunned silence as reality seemed to hiccup around the Devourer fleet. The massive hive ships, which had been moving in perfect coordination just moments before, suddenly began to slow down. Their weapons stopped firing, their hulls started to buckle, and their fighter swarms fell silent. "What's happening to them?" General Thorne asked, his morphin form shifting through configurations of confusion and fear. "We've isolated the Devourer fleet in an accelerated time stream," Lieutenant Sarah Kim explained through the communication link. "From their perspective, they're experiencing approximately 1,000 years for every second that passes in normal space. Their technology cannot compensate for that level of temporal differential." Within minutes, the Devourer hive ships had aged into inert masses of corroded metal. The machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia had been defeated, not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of how time and space could be manipulated. "Rescue operations beginning," Captain Foster reported. "Deploying constructor ships to the affected worlds." The alien commanders watched in amazement as human vessels approached the partially consumed planets of the Zephyrian system. But instead of conducting traditional rescue operations, the humans began doing something that looked like magic. Cities that had been reduced to rubble reassembled themselves. Forests that had been stripped of life began growing again. Oceans that had been drained refilled with clean water. "How are you rebuilding entire worlds in real time?" Commander Zara asked, her hive mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Matter manipulation at the molecular level," Professor Bennett replied. "We've learned to work with the fundamental forces that hold atoms together. Once you understand those relationships, rebuilding becomes a matter of asking the matter to remember its previous configuration." Within 6 hours, the Zephyrian system had been completely restored. 12 billion beings who should have been dead were alive and unharmed. Worlds that should have been consumed were thriving. The Devourers, who had never been defeated in recorded history, were nothing but space debris. "This changes everything," Admiral Kex said quietly, his crystalline form displaying colors that indicated profound shock. "If you can do this, if you can defeat the Devourers and rebuild entire star systems in hours instead of decades, then the galaxy doesn't need to live in fear anymore," Director Hayes finished. "The Devourers were a symptom of the same problem that creates wars between species. They represented pure consumption, pure competition, pure scarcity-based thinking. Once you move beyond those limitations, they become just another engineering problem to solve." The alien fleet commanders looked at each other across species barriers that suddenly seemed much less important. They had come to Sol to discipline a rebellious species. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a new type of civilization, one that could solve problems they had thought were unsolvable. "What do you want from us?" Admiral Kex asked finally. Director Hayes smiled. "We want you to go home and tell your people what you've seen. Tell them that there's a better way to live, a better way to organize galactic civilization. Tell them that scarcity and competition aren't natural laws, they're choices, and choices can be changed. The human ships began forming up around the alien fleet again, preparing to escort them back to Council space. But this time, the aliens weren't being guided as prisoners or students. They were being sent home as messengers, carrying news that would reshape the galaxy forever. 6 months after the alien fleet returned from Sol with impossible stories about human technology and philosophy, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Amy Walsh stood in her new office on Luna Station, watching construction crews work on the latest expansion project. Vorthak engineers collaborated with Kalari drones and Morphin shapers to build structures that none of their species could have imagined individually. The transformation hadn't happened through conquest or coercion. It had happened because species, after species had sent delegations to Earth, seen what was possible, and asked to join the new system. The Galactic Council had quietly dissolved itself and reformed as the Terran Cooperative, with Earth serving as the coordination center for a rapidly growing network of civilizations that had chosen cooperation over competition. The irony still amazes me, Amy told her assistant, Mark Chen, as they reviewed integration reports from 17 different star systems. We spent 3 centuries believing that Earth was dead, that humans were orphans scattered across the galaxy. Meanwhile, Earth was becoming something none of us could recognize. Mark pulled up a holographic display showing the latest expansion statistics. 43 species have requested full integration into the cooperative system. Another 67 are in various stages of transitioning their social and economic structures. The Kalari have adapted fastest, probably because their hive mind was already used to thinking collectively. Amy nodded, watching a group of mixed-species children play in the station's central park. Human kids were teaching Vorthak youngsters how to climb trees, while Morphin shapeshifters created playground equipment by simply becoming swings and slides. The sight still seemed impossible, but it was becoming normal. The door to Amy's office opened, and Admiral Kex entered. The massive crystalline being had requested reassignment to Luna Station after returning from his first visit to Earth. His military uniform had been replaced by the simple blue clothing that all cooperative members wore, and his crystalline structure had taken on the warm golden hues that indicated contentment in Vorthak physiology. "The Andromeda probe network is reporting interesting results," Kex said, his musical voice carrying notes of excitement. "Long-range sensors have detected 17 new civilizations in the target galaxy. 3 appear to be pre-space flight. 12 are in early expansion phases, and 2 show signs of having achieved post-scarcity economics." Amy felt the familiar thrill of discovery. The Cooperative's exploration program was unlike anything the old Galactic Council had attempted. Instead of sending military scouts to evaluate new species for potential conquest or exploitation, Earth's ships carried teams of scientists, engineers, and teachers whose mission was to offer assistance and partnership. "What's our approach timeline?" she asked. "Captain Cross is leading the contact team," Kex replied. "His ship launches tomorrow. They'll make contact with the post-scarcity civilizations first, since they're most likely to understand what we're offering." Ryan Cross had come a long way from hauling freight between colonies. His new command, the exploration vessel Unity, carried a crew of 30 beings from 12 different species. Their mission was to find civilizations that were ready to join the growing network of cooperative societies and to offer help to those that weren't quite there yet. The Unity's bridge was designed around the principle of inclusive functionality. Every species on the crew could access the controls through interfaces adapted to their specific physiology and cognitive patterns. Decisions were made through consensus rather than hierarchy, with the ship's artificial intelligence serving as a neutral facilitator when discussions became complex. "Approaching the first target system," reported Science Officer Kim Park, whose parents had been among the humans who grew up believing Earth was lost. "Preliminary scans indicate a Type 2 civilization with Dyson sphere construction around their primary star." Energy signatures suggest they've solved the fusion matter conversion problems. Captain Cross smiled. Type 2 civilizations were rare, and finding one that had independently developed post-scarcity technology was exciting. These were people who would understand what the cooperative was trying to accomplish. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Standard first contact protocols, but emphasize that we're here to offer partnership rather than to demand anything. Back on Earth, Director Hayes walked through the restored Amazon rainforest with Professor Bennett, discussing the latest reports from integration teams across the galaxy. The planet had been completely healed during the centuries of hidden development. The oceans were clean, the atmosphere was perfectly balanced, and wildlife populations had been restored to levels not seen since before human civilization began. "Any regrets about revealing ourselves?" Professor Bennett asked, pausing to watch a flock of passenger pigeons wheel overhead. The species had been extinct for centuries until Earth's genetic restoration projects brought them back. "None whatsoever," Hayes replied. "We spent too long hiding, learning, preparing. The galaxy needed to see what was possible when species chose cooperation over competition. They passed a group of human children who were video calling with friends on Vorthak Prime, the crystalline homeworld that had been transformed from a military fortress into a center for artistic creation. The young humans were learning to create music through harmonic crystal resonance, while their alien friends experimented with human concepts like painted visual art. The most interesting development has been the feedback effect, Professor Bennett observed. As other species join the cooperative, they're bringing ideas and perspectives that are making our own systems better. The Kalari's collective consciousness has helped us improve our decision-making processes. The Morphin ability to adapt physical forms has inspired new approaches to engineering. Even the Vorthak's mathematical precision has enhanced our computational systems. Hayes nodded, watching a construction crew that included members of 6 different species working together to build a new research facility. They moved with the kind of seamless coordination that had once seemed impossible between different forms of life. The old galaxy was built on the assumption that resources were limited and species had to compete for survival, he said. Once you remove those assumptions, everything changes. Suddenly, diversity becomes strength instead of a source of conflict. A communication alert chimed softly in the forest air around them. The message was from Captain Cross's exploration team in Andromeda Galaxy. "Director Hayes," came Ryan's voice through the organic speakers that grew like flowers from nearby trees. "You need to see what we've found here. The post-scarcity civilizations we contacted aren't just advanced. They're part of a network that spans multiple galaxies, and they've been waiting for someone like us to make contact." The holographic display that materialized between the trees showed images from the Andromeda Galaxy that challenged even Earth's expanded understanding of what was possible. Entire star systems had been converted into living ecosystems that functioned as single organisms. Planets moved in choreographed patterns that created art on a galactic scale. Species that had evolved on different worlds billions of years apart had somehow learned to merge their consciousness into collective intelligences that spanned light years. "They call themselves the Harmony," Captain Cross continued. "According to their representatives, they've been watching the development of life across multiple galaxies for millions of years. They've been waiting for civilizations to evolve beyond scarcity-based thinking so they could make contact without causing cultural contamination." Professor Bennett felt a familiar thrill of discovery, mixed with humility. Earth's achievements, which had seemed so revolutionary just months ago, were apparently just the first steps in a much larger journey. "What do they want from us?" Hayes asked. "Nothing," came the reply. "They want to offer us something. Membership in a network of civilizations that spans multiple galaxies. Access to technologies and knowledge that we can't even imagine yet. And most importantly, the chance to help other species make the same transition we've made." The implications were staggering. Earth had revealed itself to save one galaxy from stagnation and conflict. But it appeared that there was an entire universe of civilizations working together to nurture the development of life and consciousness wherever it emerged. Back on Luna Station, Amy Walsh received the same transmission and felt her world view expanding again. She had spent her career studying signals from distant stars, never imagining that some of those signals might be coming from civilizations that were actively trying to help others evolve. "This changes our entire understanding of our place in the universe," she told Mark Chen. "We thought Earth was unique in developing cooperative civilization, but apparently it's the natural result of any species that survives long enough to move beyond scarcity-based thinking." Admiral Kex, listening to the transmission in his new role as Director of Interspecies Relations, felt something that his warrior culture had never taught him to experience: hope for a future without conflict. The Vorthak had spent millennia believing that strength came from domination. Now he was learning that true strength came from helping others become stronger. The message from the Andromeda Network included coordinates for what they called graduation ceremonies, events where entire galaxies celebrated species that had successfully transitioned to cooperative civilization. Earth had been invited to attend the next ceremony as honored guests. "There's something else," Captain Cross added, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "The Harmony representatives told me that Earth's approach to the transition was unusually rapid and successful. Most species take thousands of years to move from competitive to cooperative civilization. We did it in 3 centuries, and we managed to bring an entire galaxy with us in 6 months." "Why?" Hayes asked. "Because humans never forgot how to dream about better possibilities, even when we thought our homeworld was dead. The Harmony says that's rare. Most species that lose their home planets become focused on survival rather than growth. But humans scattered across the galaxy kept believing in something better, even when they had no evidence that it was possible." The transmission ended, leaving Earth's leadership to contemplate a future that was larger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. The galaxy that had once treated humans as barely tolerated refugees was now part of a cooperative network that spanned multiple galaxies. And at the center of it all was Earth, the world that everyone had thought was dead. Rex Thornfield, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the outer colonies, stood in the same library on New Geneva where this story had begun. The old book about Earth's history was still on the shelf, but it had been joined by thousands of new volumes documenting the planet's hidden centuries and its emergence as the catalyst for galactic transformation. He opened the book to the last page and began writing a new chapter. Earth was never dead. It was just waiting for the right moment to remind the galaxy what humans could accomplish when they stopped accepting limitations and started creating solutions. Today, that reminder has become an invitation to join something greater than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Outside the library windows, ships from dozens of species moved through space in perfect harmony, carrying the message of cooperation to distant stars. The galaxy was no longer a place where species competed for scraps. It had become a stepping stone to something much larger, much more wonderful, and much more worthy of the infinite creativity that life could achieve when it worked together. They had forgotten about Earth, but Earth had never forgotten about them. And now, nobody would ever forget about the possibilities that opened up when civilizations chose to build together instead of tear apart.